The two men that will be talking are Joe Smith and Artie Shaw, both legends in the music business. We will be listening to an off-the-record interview given by Artie Shaw. Joe Smith gets right to it, and Artie Shaw doesn't sugarcoat anything. It's an unvarnished look behind the scenes at what a music life can really be like. I'd love to put some of Artie's music on here as a soundtrack, but I'm not going to risk having licensing and copyright issues. The Library of Congress has authorized fair use of the interview, so if you want to hear some of his music, just go on YouTube. So without further ado, the interview.
If I could be Tommy Dorsey. He loves it. The analyst said, would you sign now on the dotted line to be Tommy Dorsey? Answer is obviously, how can you sign to be somebody you aren't? I mean, I used to look at Tommy. Tommy used to look at me. He said, Jesus Christ. He'd say to me, I envy you when I lived on my farm. I said, what are you talking about? You envy me. You can have a farm. He said, I envy you being able to live like that. He liked the tumult. He liked to be around crowds.
What about Miller, Goodman, those people?
I can't talk for anyone else.
I mean, did you ever discuss it with them?
Of course. I discussed it with Tony Bennett.
Yeah.
We had a discussion only last summer. I tried to talk to him. I said, how do you cope with doing I Lost My Heart in San Francisco? He said, I'm grateful. I love it that they want me to do that. I said, but don't you understand what I'm talking about? To keep playing the same thing? Don't you go a little ape? Don't you go a little off the wall, a little nutty? No. He said, I'm very grateful. Well, how can you? We're talking on two different levels. He's talking about reception and money and attendance, and I'm talking about inner-person satisfaction.
Other than that, other than having...
There is nothing other than that.
What was about the band business that you did or didn't like?
Man, why don't you ask me what I did like?
What did you
The
like?
music.
The music.
That's all.
Yeah.
At its best, I liked the music. And I wanted to keep on growing, and I was in a business that said no. You say, Goodman, keep playing, sing, sing, sing. To this day, he's still doing it when he's still alive. He's still playing the same thing. You heard that thing he did on PBS? Oh, I couldn't do that. I could no more in the world go back and do that. I mean, it's impossible. Alan Livingston asked me to recreate my band on a record one time. I did, for Capitol. But I didn't play. I had Walt Levinsky play the clarinet. I could no longer stand the enormous effort it takes to achieve what you try to achieve, perfection. And at the same time, be doing it on something I did. It was all done. Why do it again?
When you were sitting there in New York as a sideman, when you first came into the city...
I quit then, when I was 23.
Well, why did you quit that? That wasn't the same thing every time either.
I was playing for selling Chevrolets and cigarettes.
That was studio work?
That's all it was. The better the work, the more, quote, commercial. I don't like that word. It's a bad word. But the more monotonous, the more degrading, the more demeaning, the more awful the music was.
You feel that held true for bands like Ellington and Basie and...
Well, Ellington finally went a little crazy. Yeah. You know that, don't you? When he started writing all this liturgical music, best he ever did was Cottontail and things like that. That was the best he will ever do. I mean, if he goes down at all as a musician, it'll be for that. You don't go off into these crazy monumental... You know, T.S. Eliot once said, and a very smart remark, no one who ever won the Nobel Prize ever wrote anything worth reading afterwards. You get monumentalized. You take yourself too seriously. The best music I made was when people let me alone, and we'd get it blizzard, and there's nobody in the audience out there, and the managers would go home, and I'd say, no, we played for ourselves all night.
Was it possible to have a band without doing that, without touring? And
you tell me how.
I don't know.
I had lawyers, I had all kinds of people. Nobody could ever show me how to keep a band together and be left alone to do what you want. To grow, to develop. You tell an artist, you tell Picasso, keep playing blue. Keep writing blue, period. Keep making those blue things. Tell Eliot to keep writing The Wasteland.
But you could move your music along.
No, you couldn't.
You couldn't?
No, you could not.
You don't think
one of the best bands I've had, some of the records I'm doing now, were made in '49. Yeah. That band died.
How about Woody Herman? Didn't his band change?
I can't talk for Woody Herman.
But
Woody's a vassal of the IRS. If he quits, they'll put him in jail. We know that. Woody said to me one time, I have nothing else. This is all he had.
I didn't mean it bad, but he had different kinds of bands. A band that played the blues and a Stan Getz band.
Whatever, I don't know. Woody is his own life. I can't.
You had different kinds of bands.
But if the audience doesn't buy a band, what's the point of keeping it together?
They bought your band.
Not the '49 one. That was the best band, one of the best bands you ever heard.
49 band, but I'm talking before then.
Well, before then I tried things and I tried something else. It's like asking Beethoven, why do you write a quartet and a sonata and a symphony? Because you want to try different things. If you're a musician, or if at least you're cursed with this temperament of seeking or being whatever they call an artist, I hate that word too, a little pompous. But if you have that kind of temperament, you're screwed.
Did you listen to the other bands much?
No more than I had to.
What'd you think of them?
Which?
Goodman?
Oh, Goodman did one thing. In 36, he did it. He never did anything since.
Glenn Miller?
Very mechanical. Lawrence Welk. Tommy, good band.
Good man.
Tommy's the only good band,
Harry
I think,
James?
of that. Harry James was too lacquer, too tearful, crying in his beer, all that schmaltz. I hated it.
Duke Ellington?
Duke, at his best, was very good. Had a good jazz band. Bassy, very good.
Jimmy Lunsford?
Jimmy, marvelous.
It's amazing how I hear that from so many disparate sides about the Lunsford.
Well, because it's true. What's valid is valid. It'll always be valid. We don't laugh at Mozart because it was 17th century.
No, not at all.
It's dated, but it's good.
But Lunsford is a name that if you were to go through your top 10 bands, most people wouldn't even list them.
Well, he finally had to break it up. It didn't go anywhere. Couldn't make a living with it after a while.
How about Woody Herman? How did you regard him?
Woody had some good bands, but he stuck with a terrible thing called Woodchopper's Ball. And Woody's clarinet himself didn't, let's not kid about it. Woody doesn't kid about it. I walked into a place one time where he was playing, and Woody saw me, and he said, "Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not playing any clarinet tonight. The man just walked in." And he announced me. So Woody and I always got along. I mean, I liked him. We had a mutual respect. And he tried to do decent things. Kenton tried to do decent things. The point was to try to insist on some sort of dignity. We were not dance bands. Remember, dance bands suffer from the opprobrium of Meyer Davis and company. Get behind the potted palms and don't shake hands on the bandstand and all of this bullshit. I didn't want to be that. I never have wanted to do that.
What did you want to be? What would
a growing person living his life and playing enough music, playing it well enough so that I could be satisfied with what I was doing and make a living.
You couldn't reconcile the musicianship with being a musician with the way you want to live your life.
Not true. I couldn't reconcile it with the fact that an audience would not support me if I did what I wanted to do. I had to do what they wanted to do. Music to order. It's like asking an artist to do illustrations for magazine stories.
But you're so terrific at it.
So what? The audience didn't care.
Well, the audience cared that you were terrific. There was
no, they didn't care. They cared because I was a nice-looking kid and I had a band, and they liked what I did up to a certain point. I drew graphs of this, I do lectures on this subject.
But you say that in '49 they rejected your band, but
totally.
But up until then, wow.
Well, up until then, what? From '39. I was
36,
then the war came.
Yeah.
All right, the war knocked a hole in it. In the war, we did whatever we wanted to do. They were grateful, the kids were. They almost cried when they heard the band. There was a nice feeling about that. I had a good band in the Navy.
Mind playing the same things then?
Well, different kind of audience. You're playing for your peers. You're playing for kids who are out there, and you were kind of representing a piece of Americana for them. You're out on these desolated islands, these places that, the joke used to be about war aims, remember? War aims was to give the Japs Guadalcanal and make them live on it. That was the kind of thing. You were playing in these horrible places, and these guys would say, after a while, that got a bit much, too. I mean, I couldn't handle that. So finally, they shipped us back here. But I came back from Mexico, and I put strings together, put a big string band together. All right, we made a record called Frenesy, Studio Men. I'm not crazy about that record, but it pointed a way. It was something that hadn't been done before. In the context of a big orchestra, you had jazz of a kind. So I put together that band that made Stardust with Billy Butterfield and Jack Janney. It was a good band. I made some fine records with that. Okay, I did what I had to do with that. Let's try something else. So I tried something else. No, they don't want that. So, the point is I was geared up to a deal in which you have to make $20,000, whatever it is, a week in order to keep paying these men. If you can't make it, you have no band. What are we talking about?
When you started, how did you cast the band? Did you set what you wanted to be musically and pick the players for it, or pick the best players and put your...
I picked the best players I could afford when I first began, and I could afford very little. I paid everybody $60 a week, and I was lucky to get $60 a week.
That was the Tony Pastor...
That band, Billie Holiday, all that.
Billie Holiday.
That's it. Billy got $60 a week, no matter what she said in a book.
What was $60 a week then?
That was the amount we could pay.
I mean, what was $60? It was nothing, was it?
In those days, you could make it.
Yeah.
You could live. You could pay. I spent $2.50 a day for a hotel room. So did the men. So if you spent $2.50, and we used to sleep over, we would do that trick of going at night, etc. So the men would spend about $8, $10 a week on rooms, and the food was cheap. And we traveled in a bus. We lived like gypsies.
Did you enjoy any of that part of
I loved it.
You did.
We were a growing thing. The band was evolving. I was writing music for it. I was having a ball.
Were you ever one of the guys?
Never, no, couldn't do it. You can't do that. A general can't mix with the troops.
But you enjoyed the experience of it.
The guys liked me. I liked them. We got along fine, but on a leader-employer basis. I recognized very early on that once I became a leader, I was of another ilk, another tribe. And I'd stand there between them and the audience. I'm the middleman. They're all a bunch of wild-eyed guys wanting to play anything. The audience out there not knowing much. I'm the bottleneck that goes through me.
Are you saying
I kept very, very rigid control over that band.
you didn't get a kick out of being out in front there and all the people?
At that time?
Yeah,
Yes, on the way up, it was great.
Yeah.
The epigraph of my The Trouble with Cinderella is, if you wish for something in your youth, you better look out because you may be so, etc. Unfortunate is to get it. Well, I got it. And I had a tiger by the tail, and it wouldn't let me go. It's very easy to raise your lifestyle, especially if you're a poor little kid from a Jewish kid from the Lower East Side. So you raise your lifestyle up to a point where you think, and at one point I was making so much money that I thought either I put this away or find somebody to advise me, or I'll live like an emperor. Very few people like me ever get a chance to see what it's like to live like an emperor. Be the head of your whole world, do anything you want. Had the money to do anything. I would fire guys. I became a lunatic. I would hire a manager and I'd say, get me so-and-so. He'd say, do you know how much that costs? I'd say, fire him, I don't want him. If I want to know how much it costs, I'll ask you. That's the way I was. I became tyrannical. But I learned what that was like. So I recognize every crazy when I see him. I know
When
just
did
what
that happen? Before the war? Or you were getting nuts
Before
like that?
what?
Before the war?
Well, not the peak of that 38, 39 band. I was making the equivalent today of make $60,000 in 38. That's $600,000 today, in a week. You know how much money that is?
Was that coming from records, concerts?
Well, I played a week in Chicago. I forget what theater, Oriental or State, whatever. I had a percentage. I went out of there with $40,000. I did the Old Gold show. I did 5 or 7, the 2 record dates. I think I ended up with $60,000 that week, gross.
Wow.
That's a lot of money. At that time, you could buy a Cadillac for $2,000.
Now, did the money mask the fact that you weren't very happy about doing it? Or?
I didn't see the money. It went through me. I would buy a Patek Philippe every week to prove that I made money. Just to show you the scale, a Patek Philippe in those days was $300 to $500. It had $3,000 to $6,000, $8,000. So that's what $60,000 was then. And people would say to me, I remember Sammy Kahn, what are you doing with these watches? I'd say, man, if you make $300 and you spend $3, is that a lot of money? That's what's going on here. You follow? So, it's very bedizzening. If you're a halfway sane human being, there is something so insane about that I began to ask myself, and at that time I wasn't too clear. I began to ask myself, why am I getting $600,000? All right, I'll keep $400,000. And the first clarinetist in the Philharmonic is getting $1,500 on that scale, or 150 versus 40. 40,000 versus 150. All right, let's say, even for the sake of the argument, given I'm one of the greatest maybe the greatest clarinet player that ever came down the pike, am I that much better than him? It began to dawn on me that this was lunacy. Then it came clear to me. I thought about it. It has nothing to do with value. It has to do with money. The manager puts me into that theater, gives me 60% of the gate. He gets $40,000 if I get 60. He'll pay me every week to make $40,000. He gives me the barn, gives me the stagehands and the lighting, and there I am.
But isn't everything artistic kind of perception and subjective? If you say Monet...
I think it's a big mistake.
If we make a market of Monet...
Well, I know, but Monet never saw that.
No, but if you take a living artist... Today,
what would have happened to Monet? Well, most living artists today are going a little nuts.
You take a Jasper Johnson, you pay $1 million...
I know, he's going a little crazy.
He isn't that much better than the guy that gets...
He isn't that much better. I had a friend named Mike Goldberg, who was an abstract expressionist. When I came back from Spain, I got to know Mike. He had an accountant, he bought a house, he bought himself a blonde mainline Philadelphia wife, and he lost it all. Abstract expressionism went out the window. He lost it all. He's gone crazy. He stole a painting from one of his best friends, de Kooning. And de Kooning came back from Europe and found out he made Mike go into therapy rather than put him in jail.
While all this craziness was going on, you're making this $60,000, which is going to $600,000. Were you spending a lot of time with your music?
Well, that was going on. There was no time for that. No.
No time for music.
My head was completely turned around. Looked like the little girl in The Exorcist. My head went back.
So what happened? The arrangers?
Everything went bad. Everything went bad. I no longer was concerned with what I was doing because I was made to do the same thing over and over and over and over. I've asked interviewers who ask me this question. How would you like to interview me every day, and I'll say the same things and you write the same words every day? Would you enjoy that? And they look at you and say, well, that's appalling. And that's what I had to do. Go in and go through your little bag of tricks. Do that little bag of tricks every night.
Let me ask you some questions about running a band.
By the way,
Yes.
leading a band on a theater stage,
Yes.
if you would change one tune just to get rid of that boredom, and you remember we used to do 7 shows a day, 7 days a week, months at a time. Now, you know how boring it is to start a show with Swonderful and end it with Concerto for Clarinet or whatever I was doing in those days? Every day, I'd change a tune once. The manager would come running back. God damn it, don't do that. Those kids will be here all day. Well, how can you live with that?
How do musicians deal with that?
I guess they turn a number, they go into another mode, as we would say in computerese.
What would turn you all on? What would get you excited? A new arrangement,
Musically?
a new song? I mean,
Well, we could try to do it, but there weren't enough. I do lectures, and they're called 3 chords for beauty's sake and 1 to pay the rent. I was doing 4 for the rent. I couldn't afford not to. When we were doing a theater, occasionally a piece that I really liked, with that string band. By the way, that was a hell of a band. The war broke that up.
That was the big band.
With Billy and
Yeah.
the big string band. That was a marvelous band. Occasionally we did things in theaters that I thought were really fine. We'd
That's
play
the
a thing
premise.
called American Nocturne. It was like a concert hall. The audience would sit there in rapt silence, finish on a very unspectacular, quiet note, and they would applaud like in a concert hall. See, I deplore what goes on with this so-called jazz. People are taught to scream at the end of a solo. Another guy's starting a solo. They're missing the whole transition from the end of that solo to the new one. They're yelling, screaming, because they've been, and band leaders saying, Rockinghampton, ladies and gentlemen. Instead of shut up and when it's over, applaud if you like, and then get the solos to stand up.
Well, tell me, did the Gramercy 5 give you an opportunity to spread out a little bit?
A little better than when I was in. It was a different experience. I had a big string band. We didn't have a chance to play much straight-ahead jazz, so I formed a little group.
And
We did
was
that.
that winged? Was that pretty off the cuff?
Well, no, we had a framework and we played jazz within it. And now and then we had the misfortune of getting a smash hit called Summit Ridge Drive. And then don't change it. You know that when I had Lenny Hayton with me, I said, let's do Begin the Beginning. Let's make a new arrangement of it. Put the old arrangement, embody it in the middle of it, and put strings around it, and add alter chords, alter harmony. We did, made a beautiful arrangement of it. It's been recorded. I think it was on a Musicraft record. Audience would not hold still for it. No, do it like the record.
They want what they want.
I can't argue
I
that.
can't argue.
They have a right. I'd feel I defrauded them if I didn't do it.
We'd have our acts play around the country, and Neil Young or something like that. He didn't want to sing the old songs. I said, the people who are here, this is the only time they're going to sing.
Joe, I understand it. I understand it too well. One of my problems is I empathize too well with the other guy. I empathize with him. It doesn't matter. I agree with it.
How much of a hand did you have in picking vocalists? Did you pick everybody for the
I
bands?
picked everybody that worked in my band.
God,
If they didn't suit me, they were not
What a
there.
run of people.
But at a certain point, I didn't give a goddamn anymore. I had singers like, I don't even know who they were. Imogene Lynn, Paula Kelly. She was okay with a group, but she couldn't sing. I had some good singers.
Helen Forrest.
Helen was great. Billy was great.
Holiday, and
That-
the girl came, Georgia Gibbs. She had a
Georgia was a hell of a
Yeah,
singer.
she was a good singer.
But nobody wanted those records either. She's gone.
Who was the boy singer? You never had much of boy singer.
One, I didn't. Tony Pastor,
Yeah, Tony Pastor.
he used to amuse me.
Yeah.
He would sing Rosalie and make me laugh. And when he did El Rancho Grande, I'd curl up. So that was fun.
You had a reputation too. That's all I read. Being a dilettante, very opinionated.
I'm very opinionated.
Put down things. A snob. Were any of those true?
I don't know about snob. What the hell do I know what snob means?
I mean, you read
Snob is a
books
phony
and-
word.
Yeah.
I mean, a snob is somebody who pretends to be what he isn't. I've had enough trouble to find out who I am to try to play games with that.
You were getting physically ill a few times during that.
Well,
period.
that's it's a tough life.
Was that?
You recognize somebody called me the other night talking about Goodman being, and then I said, I'm alive. And it suddenly dawns I'm the only one of that crew alive anymore.
Sure.
There were 7 of us who made that era.
Who
Take
was
them in
it?
any order you want. Dorsey, Goodman, me, Miller, Ellington, Lunsford, and Basie. All of them dead. Here I am. That's some kind of something, isn't it?
I would think so.
Says I must have done something right.
You started after. You came.
That could be called snobism. I'm alive, they're dead. All right, I'm a snob. I'm for life.
When you had a band, Hot Lips Page, did you put many black people in the band? Could you do it? Could you get away with
It's
it?
very difficult.
Yeah.
Lips could handle it. He was the only one who could handle it. Billy couldn't handle it. It was murder for her. At a certain point, she just had to get out. We parted very amicably, despite the press. I had a terrible press. The press, among other things, said that I fired her because she was black. Never occurred to my heart, in spite of that, she was black. That's kind of dumb. But all right, when she left, it was impossible for her to go on with that. We'd play a gig, or we'd play a job, and then she couldn't go in and eat. Lips, the same thing, but Lips could handle it. Lips had a more sunny disposition. He was had a better, more stable ego. Billy came from a terrible background. Lips must have been loved by his family as a kid. So he grew up with a lot of cheerfulness, and he could handle this bullshit. Matter of fact, when a guy in the band would screw around, Lips would say, "Don't fuck with my living, man." He was the spark plug. He kept the guys together. Very sane guy. Roy, on the other hand, went crazy with it. He couldn't handle it. But when I hired these people, I would tell them that. I'd say, this is very rough. I want you in the band because I like the way you play or you sing or whatever. But I can't run the world. I'm not the emperor. I can run the stand. When we're on the bandstand, we're on the stage, you will be taken care of. And you'll be equal to, not above nor below, except in salary. You were above most of the men in the band. But don't expect anything off the stand. I can put you in the bus, and if you come some other way, I'm not responsible. And yet you go to a town, they can't stay in the same hotel. They got to go to what they used to call nigger town to find somewhere. So they got to find a cab and scuffle around and find a place. They couldn't go in the hotel. We got Billy into one hotel once as a gag one time, painted a little red dot between her eyes, and two of the guys carried her bags, and she got a hotel room. But not as a black, she couldn't, or as a colored person. So it was very difficult. But that's only a minor part of the business is riddled with mishigas. Craziness. The whole business is riddled with it. I wouldn't want to be Sinatra today if you gave me the United States.
Why not?
Because I think he's crazy. I think he's become a lunatic. They used to say about Jolson, and friends of his, like a guy named Chuck Green used to know Jolson very well, and he said one time, "The trouble with you, Jolie, is you think you're Al Jolson. Sinatra thinks he's Frank Sinatra."
Well, it's one of
It's
the...
nothing. See, I know I'm not Artie Shaw. That's some guy who makes me a living. Me, I know who I am. I'm some guy, a normal human being, trying very hard to be a civilian, and I can be Artie Shaw anytime you want me to be. Get up on a stage and do it.
That time you were always Artie Shaw.
I was forced to be, and I didn't see the distinction. And any good psychoanalyst will tell you that if you live in a schizoid, well, somebody once said that. I don't know who, but I did a documentary film. Somebody made a documentary film on me, and one of the lines I said in it is, the only rational response to an irrational society is to be irrational. If you're in a lunatic asylum and everybody goes around thinking he's Napoleon, or you better call him Napoleon or he'll kill you. So that's not sane. It's accepting the realities of the circumstances.
I mean, did all the turmoil in your personal life, did that affect your music?
That was not a disease. That was a symptom.
That was a symptom. But
Symptom what we're talking about.
Did that get in the way of the music at all?
Sometimes, mostly not, but sometimes it did. The truth of the matter, Joe, is if you go along not knowing who you are or what you are, and you find yourself in a circumstance that's pushing you and pulling you and tormenting you and rewarding you inordinately, all of those things, you can go a little nuts. And I look back at that as a form of minor lunacy. The period from 1938, when I walked out of that band, already that's lunacy. I could have reorganized, I could have changed, I could have done other things and said, all right, I'll make less. I remember in interviews, I said, I wish I weren't number 1. I'd like to be number 10. No pressure on you. You're number 10 man. It'd be great. Let you alone, let you do. But I couldn't do it. I can't control what the audience does. The audience perceived me in a certain way. And in my insecure attempt to please that audience, I lost myself. Now, some people don't have these problems.
Well, I was going to say, in the whole panoply of music, of all the stars that have come along...
Verdi quit, didn't he?
Yeah.
Well, why?
Well, I mean, let's go...
Can't ask him.
Let's go from you on.
Well, but we can talk about Verdi, can't we, for a minute, and at least get to a syndrome here, that some people cannot take too much adulation, which gets in the way of growth.
It probably resulted in Presley's demise.
I can only say it depends on the kind of sensibilities you are given with your genes or your upbringing. It's too complicated. We're talking about sociology.
You were really given some sensitive genes.
I've got some good ones. I'm still alive, I keep saying.
No, the good thing is
those are good. Well, you can't have it all good. You take the whole spectrum. You take what they give you, Joe. You can't pick and choose. You can't. A person is not bacon with, a person is bacon, is lean and is fat. You can't say, let's get rid of one and keep the other. It ceases to be bacon.
What was the best band? Was that the band with the strings?
Best for what? I don't know how
for
you
you,
I don't know how you measure that.
Yeah.
Which came the closest?
Yeah.
Along the spectrum, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm getting a record together which is going to be called These Are My Choice. And it's going to go all the way from the first band out up to the last one.
How good were those bands?
What, their best?
Yeah, they're best.
They were the greatest that ever was. There was never a better band than my band at its best. But then you could say that about Ellington. At its best. It's a measurable force and immovable, movable force and whatever, immovable object and measurable force.
How good were you? How good were you?
At my best, I was as good as you could be. There are records of mine and playings of mine that I can say nobody can do that better. That'll be good for the next 200 years. I know that. That is if we're here 200 years. If the species is here.
Did you feel much of a rivalry with anybody during that period?
No. I didn't. Matter of fact, there's a little story about Goodman and me. I've told this to people. You're talking about Benny, because he played the we were put in that position. He took it more seriously than I did. I had lunch with him one day at the Oak Room. We were talking. I'm talking about something I wanted to do and that I wanted to interest him in doing. And for some various reason, Benny was a very suspicious, kind of reclusive guy, and he wouldn't go with it, which was too bad because it would have been a very good idea. So we got talking. He started asking me about. He said, "I heard that Mozart clarinet quintet you did." I said, "What? You recorded?" I said, "I never recorded the Mozart clarinet quintet." She said, "Yes, you did. I heard it on a record." I said, "I'm sorry, but you didn't." He said, "Well, what did I hear?" I said, "You might have heard a transcription. I did it at WR with their quartet one time, and somebody might have transcribed it and done it." And they did, as I found out. It's on that Book of the Month album that's just been put out of mine. Anyway, he said, "Not bad." And I said, "Well, it wasn't meant to be, Benny." And he looked at me, kind of that dumb look of his, and he started, So he said, "How do you like playing that kind of stuff?" I said, "What kind of stuff?" "It's music. Written music as opposed to improvised music." "Is that what you mean?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, we play written music all the time. An arrangement is written, and now and then it says solo ad lib. You do what you want. In Mozart, you'll have a cadenza. You can do some things. You don't do quite as much ad lib as we do, but it's not as wide a road, but you can move around a little." He said, "Well, that dropped. He didn't quite go with that." Then he said, He said, "Do you like Reginald Kell?" I said, "Well, he's a good player, but he's a little too schmaltzy for me. It's a little too unctuous, a little too oily. What about Simeon Bellison?" I said, "Well, he's too rigid." "Well, who do you like?" So I said, "Well, I like Dan Bonnat. I used to work with Dan Bonnat in the Howard Barlow Symphony, CBS. And Dan Bonnat was a great French clarinet player. It was a privilege to play second to him. I learned a great deal. People ask me, who did you learn from? I learned from the guy next to me. And when I knew more, I'd go to another guy. All right, so I said, Dan Bonnat. He didn't know who he was. I said, Dan used to play first principal clarinets with the Philadelphia when Stokowski was there. "Oh, yeah, I guess he's pretty good." I said, "He's damn good. What do you mean? He's one of the best there is." So then another clarinet, kept asking me about clarinet players. I said, "Benny, you're too hung up on the clarinet," which I meant. He said, "What do you mean? That's what we play, isn't it?" I said, "No, I've been trying to play music." And a faint light bulb went on in his eyes. I could see that he had never seriously, I don't think, up to that moment, considered the idea that the clarinet was an instrument with which you make music. For him, the clarinet was the end. The means became the end. And I remember when I was interviewed only a few weeks ago by various people when he died, I said he was so immersed in the clarinet there was nothing left over. There wasn't very much to Benny as a person, if you ever knew him. He had a narrow set of interests. And all he got into that clarinet was everything he had. What I said earlier about the nozzle down on, he did that superbly.
This is Brian from One Track Jazz. Thanks for listening. If you want to learn more about Artie Shaw, his biography is in the description. And for other jazz biographies, check out these next two videos.